My name is Cassandra Williams, and at 68 years old, I never thought my own children would abandon me at an airport gate. There aren't enough seats, they lied boarding without a backward glance like I was yesterday's garbage. 40 years of motherhood erased in an instant. The shock froze me until something unexpected ignited inside dignity. What happened next changed everything between us forever. Before I tell you how I transformed betrayal into the most liberating moment of my life, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button for more stories of resilience. I spent 40 years as a pediatric nurse dedicating my life to helping children heal while raising my own. Most of those years I did it alone. My husband David died of a sudden heart attack when I was 38, leaving me to raise our 3 children by myself. Thomas was 12, Amelia was 10, and Jack was 8 when their father collapsed in our backyard while mowing the lawn. The children watched from the kitchen window as I performed CPR, screaming for them to call 911. By the time the ambulance arrived, David was gone. I remember sitting in the hospital waiting room, still wearing my nurse uniform from the shift I had just finished, waiting for someone to tell me what I already knew. My children huddled against me, not fully understanding what had happened. That night I made a promise to myself and to them that I would do whatever it took to give them the life David would have wanted for them. And I did. For decades I worked double shifts, holidays, and weekends to provide for my family. When Thomas showed interest in business school, I picked up extra night shifts to afford his tuition. He graduated with honors from Wharton, and I watched from the audience, exhausted but bursting with pride. He never knew that I had gone 3 years without a vacation to make it happen. For Amelia, the sacrifices were different but no less significant. When she set her sights on law school, I sold my mother's antique jewelry collection and some family heirlooms that had been passed down for generations. The day she passed the bar exam, I gave her my mother's only remaining piece, a pearl necklace I had saved for this moment. She wore it to her swearing-in ceremony, and I thought she understood what it meant. Jack, my youngest, always had big dreams. When he wanted to start his own tech company at 28, I remortgaged my house to help fund his startup. The home I had spent 30 years paying off became collateral for his dreams. When his company finally turned a profit 5 years later, he took his team to Cabo San Lucas to celebrate. I watched on social media, happy for his success, but wondering why I wasn't invited to the celebration I had helped make possible. Despite the distance that seemed to grow as their lives expanded, I held on to hope that we would reconnect as a family. When my 68th birthday approached, I decided to plan something special, something to bring us all together again. A trip to Hawaii, the place David and I had always dreamed of visiting but never got the chance to. It would be our first real family vacation in 15 years. I spent months planning every detail. I researched the best resorts activities that everyone would enjoy and restaurants that would accommodate all our preferences. I saved for over a year, carefully setting aside money from my pension to make sure I could cover everything for all 3 children and their spouses. I wanted it to be perfect, a chance for us to rebuild the closeness we once had. When I presented the idea during a rare Sunday dinner at my house, they seemed enthusiastic. Thomas mentioned he could use some time away from the office. Amelia talked about the beaches she wanted to visit. Jack said he had always wanted to try surfing. Their reactions fueled my hope that this trip would be the fresh start we needed. Looking back, I should have noticed the subtle signs. The way Thomas checked his watch repeatedly throughout dinner. How Amelia steered the conversation away whenever I mentioned activities we could do together. Jack's constant checking of his phone, barely contributing to the conversation. But I was too caught up in my vision of family reconciliation to see what was right in front of me. The night before our departure, we had dinner at my house. I cooked everyone's favorite dishes just as I had done when they were children. For a few hours it felt like old times. Thomas told stories about his children. Amelia shared anecdotes from her cases, and Jack made everyone laugh with his dry humor. I went to bed that night feeling more hopeful than I had in years. What they didn't know was that I had prepared a special surprise for each of them. I had withdrawn $30,000 from my retirement savings and purchased 3 gift cards, $10,000 each, to present to them during the trip. It was money I had set aside for my own future, but I convinced myself that investing in our relationship was more important than my financial security. I wrote heartfelt cards expressing my love and gratitude for each of them, tucking the gift cards inside, along with old photos of us together. These envelopes waited in my purse, ready to be given at a special dinner I had planned for the third night of our vacation. In my diary that night, I wrote about my hopes for the trip. Tomorrow we begin a new chapter, I penned. Perhaps after this week together we can start rebuilding what we've lost. I miss being more than just their emergency contact or occasional babysitter. I miss being their mother. The morning of our departure, I was up at 4 a.m., too excited to sleep. Our flight was at 9, and Thomas was supposed to pick me up at 6. I had everything packed and ready, my suitcase and carry-on waiting by the door. I made coffee and sat on the front porch watching the sunrise and imagining the Hawaiian sunsets we would soon witness together. By 6:45, there was still no sign of Thomas. I called him, but the call went to voicemail. I sent a text asking if everything was okay. At 7, my phone finally rang. It was Thomas, sounding rushed. "Sorry, Mom, we're running late. Be there in 15 minutes. No explanation, no apology for causing me anxiety." When they finally arrived at 7:30, I had been sitting on my porch with my luggage for 45 minutes. Thomas barely got out of the car, popping the trunk from inside, while Amelia gave me a quick, distracted hug. Jack at least helped me with my suitcase, though he seemed more interested in getting it loaded quickly than in greeting me properly. "We're cutting it close," Thomas said, checking his watch as I settled into the back seat. "Traffic's going to be bad." No one asked how I was, or if I had been waiting long. The conversation during the drive centered around their own preparations, the work emails they needed to send before disconnecting, and the weather forecast for Hawaii. I sat quietly telling myself that they were just stressed about making the flight on time. When we arrived at the airport, they walked ahead of me, rolling their carry-ons while I struggled with mine. No one offered to help. At the check-in counter, Thomas was on a business call, pacing back and forth and speaking loudly. Amelia sighed impatiently as I carefully checked my passport and boarding pass details. Jack was engrossed in his phone, not even looking up when I asked him a question about the baggage allowance. The airline representative helping us noticed my struggle and kindly explained our options. "I see your seats aren't together," she said, looking at her screen. "We can try to rearrange things so your family can sit together." Before I could respond, I overheard Thomas whispering to Amelia behind me. "Does she have to sit with us the whole flight?" 6 hours next to Mom's stories. "Kill me now," Amelia responded with an eye roll. They didn't realize I could hear them. I felt a stab of pain in my chest, but maintained my composure. Years of nursing had taught me how to keep a calm face despite inner turmoil. "It's okay," I told the airline representative, forcing a smile. "We don't need to sit together. I wouldn't want to bother them." I tried to make it sound like a joke, but the airline employee gave me a sympathetic look that told me she understood exactly what was happening. The relief on my children's faces was poorly disguised. Thomas actually smiled for the first time that morning. "That's probably easier," he agreed quickly. "We can catch up when we land." As we moved toward the security line, I noticed they walked faster, creating distance between us. By the time I removed my shoes, placed my carry-on on the conveyor belt, and collected my belongings on the other side, they were nowhere to be seen. They hadn't waited for me. I found them at a coffee shop near our gate, huddled together in conversation. They didn't notice me approaching, and I overheard Thomas speaking in an annoyed tone. "Mom's turning this into a whole thing about family," he said, stirring his coffee aggressively. "It's supposed to be a vacation, not a therapy session." I stopped a few feet away, my heart sinking. Part of me wanted to turn around and go home to protect myself from more hurt, but another part, the stubborn part that had carried me through raising them alone, pushed me forward. I remembered the envelopes in my purse, the plans I had made, the hope I still desperately clung to. Taking a deep breath, I approached their table with a smile, as if I hadn't heard anything. "The line at security wasn't too bad," I said cheerfully. "I stopped to buy us some treats for the plane." I held up a bag of chocolates I had purchased, their childhood favorites, that I thought might spark some warm memories. Amelia glanced at the bag and gave a tight smile. "Thanks, Mom, but I'm watching my sugar intake." Thomas checked his watch again. "We should head to the gate. Boarding will start soon." Jack at least took a chocolate, though he immediately pocketed it rather than eating it. Small victories, I told myself. At least he took it. As we walked to the gate, the physical distance between us seemed to mirror the emotional gap that had been growing for years. My children walked several paces ahead, engaged in their own conversations or on their phones. I struggled slightly with my carry-on bag, which felt heavier as the morning progressed, but none of them noticed or offered to help. "What time does the resort check-in open?" I asked, trying to engage them in conversation about our plans. Amelia barely looked up from her phone. "It's in the itinerary, Mom," she said, her fingers continuing to type a text message. She rolled her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. I tried again with Jack. "I read that there's a welcome reception on the first night. Should we plan to attend?" Jack had his headphones half on and he pulled them down briefly. "What? Oh yeah, maybe. We'll see how we feel when we get there." He slipped the headphones back on, effectively ending the conversation. At the gate, the boarding process was beginning. The gate agent announced priority boarding for first-class passengers, followed by families with young children and those needing special assistance. My children suddenly huddled together, speaking in low voices, and occasionally glancing in my direction. After a brief discussion, Thomas approached me while the others stayed back. "Mom," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he often used with me, "there's been a change in the flight arrangements." I looked at him confused. "What do you mean we all have our boarding passes?" Thomas shifted uncomfortably, not meeting my eyes. "They had to change the aircraft model last minute. There aren't enough seats on this flight for all of us." My heart began to race. "But we checked in together. We all have assigned seats." "It's complicated," he said, looking back at Amelia and Jack for support. "The airline staff told us they'll arrange for you to take the next flight. It leaves in a few hours, and they'll have a seat for you on that one." I looked around, noticing other families boarding together without issue. "Shouldn't we speak to the gate agent together? Maybe they can find a solution so we can all travel together." Amelia stepped forward, checking her watch repeatedly. "Mom, we've already sorted it out. They were very clear there's nothing they can do. The next flight is the only option for one of us, and we thought it made the most sense for it to be you." Jack stood silently behind them, looking down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "We'll make sure the hotel knows you're coming later," Thomas added. "It's not a big deal. You'll just arrive a few hours after us." Before I could fully process what was happening, the gate agent called their boarding group. Without so much as a hug or even a proper goodbye, they picked up their bags and walked toward the jet bridge. Thomas gave a casual wave. Amelia called out a quick, "See you later," and Jack just nodded in my direction. Then they were gone, disappeared down the jet bridge without a backward glance. I stood frozen in place, my boarding pass clutched in my hand, watching as my own children abandoned me at the gate. 40 years of motherhood, of bedtime stories and bandaged knees, of college tuitions and wedding expenses, of endless sacrifices and unconditional love, all seemed to count for nothing in that moment. A kind gate agent approached me, concern evident on her face. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" she asked. "My children," I said, my voice barely audible. "They said there weren't enough seats on the flight, that I need to take the next one." The gate agent looked confused. "That's not right. We have the same aircraft that was scheduled. There have been no changes or seat reductions." She checked her computer. "You're all confirmed on this flight. Your boarding pass is valid." In that moment, the truth hit me with crushing force. They had lied to me. They had deliberately left me behind, fabricating a story about seat shortages to avoid spending 6 hours on a plane with their own mother. My hands began to shake. I fumbled with my phone, opening the family sharing app, where Thomas had added me years ago to track family travel. I could see their locations, messages, and shared itineraries. And there it was, a group text conversation from just minutes ago. Thomas got rid of Mom for the flight, told her there weren't enough seats. "Amelia, we'll have 6 hours of peace before dealing with her again." Jack Dad would have never put up with this trip anyway. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I couldn't breathe properly, my chest tight with a pain more acute than anything I had felt since David died. My children, the 3 people I loved most in the world, the ones I had dedicated my life to raising and supporting, had discarded me like an inconvenience. I barely made it to the restroom before the tears came hard and fast, accompanied by deep, gasping sobs that I couldn't control. I locked myself in a stall, sinking onto the closed toilet lid as 4 decades of suppressed hurt poured out of me. My body shook with the force of my crying, and I pressed my fist against my mouth to muffle the sounds. "Honey, are you all right in there?" A gentle voice came from outside the stall. I hadn't realized someone else had entered the restroom. I couldn't answer, couldn't find my voice through the tears. Here the voice said, and I saw a hand extending a package of tissues under the stall door. Whatever it is, it will pass. Take your time. After a few minutes, I managed to compose myself enough to unlock the door. Standing there was an elderly woman, perhaps in her 70s, with kind eyes and a concerned expression. She didn't rush away or pretend not to notice my distress as most strangers would. Instead, she stood there patiently, offering a sympathetic smile. "Thank you," I said, taking the tissues and wiping my eyes. "You want to talk about it?" she asked. Sometimes telling a stranger is easier than telling someone you know. Perhaps it was her grandmotherly demeanor, or maybe it was just that I had reached my breaking point, but I found myself pouring out the whole story to this woman I had never met before. I told her about David's death, about raising 3 children alone, about the countless sacrifices I had made. I told her about the Hawaii trip, my hopes for reconnection, and finally about being abandoned at the gate with a lie so my children wouldn't have to sit with me. The woman listened without interruption, her face reflecting compassion and increasingly indignation on my behalf. When I finished, she took my hands in hers and looked me straight in the eyes. "Honey," she said firmly, "nobody deserves that treatment, especially not from their own children." "Maybe I've been too clingy," I said, grasping for explanations that would hurt less than the truth. "Maybe they just need space." She shook her head. "There's a difference between needing space and being cruel. What they did was cruel, plain and simple." Her words hit me hard because I knew she was right. As the realization sank and memories flooded back, a lifetime of putting my children first while they increasingly pushed me to the margins of their lives. I remembered missing my own mother's funeral because Thomas had a college interview that same day. He could have rescheduled, but he didn't want to risk his slot, so I stayed with him instead of saying goodbye to my mother. I thought I was being a good mother, but now I wondered if I had simply taught him that my needs didn't matter. I remembered selling my wedding ring, the last precious connection to David, to help Amelia with the security deposit and first month's rent on her first apartment after law school. She had a job lined up at a prestigious firm, but she didn't want to wait for her first paycheck to move into the luxury building she had her heart set on. I never told her where the money came from, and she never asked. I remembered working through pneumonia to help Jack with the down payment on his first house. I had been hospitalized for 3 days, discharged myself against medical advice, and went straight to the bank to withdraw the funds he needed before the deadline. I developed complications that lingered for months afterward, but Jack got his house in the neighborhood he wanted. And it wasn't just the big sacrifices. It was the pattern of exclusion that had become so normal, I hardly noticed it anymore. Being seated at the far end of the table at grandchildren's birthday parties, not being invited to Thomas's company events where other family members were welcome. Sitting alone last Christmas while they all went skiing together, telling me at the last minute that there wasn't enough room in the cabin they had rented. As these memories washed over me, I reached into my purse for more tissues and felt the envelopes containing the gift cards. $30,000 that I had withdrawn from my retirement account, money I had planned to surprise them with during our vacation. Money that represented future security I was willing to sacrifice yet again to buy a small place in their lives. I pulled out the envelopes and stared at them, seeing them for what they were, not expressions of love, but desperate attempts to purchase the affection that should have been freely given. The woman beside me watched, silently, understanding written on her face. I looked up and caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Who was this woman with her tear-streaked face and hunched shoulders? Who was this person who had allowed herself to be discarded again and again by the very people she had given everything for? In that moment, something shifted inside me. A lifetime of accommodation and sacrifice gave way to a new feeling, unfamiliar but powerful, righteous anger followed by steely resolve. "I deserve better than this," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in years. "It stops today." The woman smiled, patting my shoulder. "Yes, you do. And yes, it does." I stood straighter, wiped my face, and applied fresh lipstick. I fixed my hair and straightened my blouse. The transformation wasn't just physical. I could feel something fundamental changing within me, a boundary forming where none had existed before. I thanked the woman for her kindness and walked out of the bathroom with a determination I hadn't felt since the day after David died, when I had promised myself I would do whatever it took to raise our children well. I had kept that promise. Now it was time to make a new one to myself. At the gate, the same agent who had spoken to me earlier was still there. She looked up as I approached. "I've been thinking about my options," I said calmly. "My family has gone ahead without me, and I understand there are seats available on this flight after all." She nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. "Yes, ma'am. We could get you on this flight if you'd like." "Actually," I said, pulling out my credit card and the gift card envelopes, "I'd like to upgrade to first class." For the first time in my adult life, I did something extravagant, solely for myself. I used the money I had set aside for my children's gifts to buy myself a first-class seat on the flight they had abandoned me from. As the gate agent processed my upgrade, I deleted the text notifications from my children without reading them. Whatever excuses or justifications they were offering could wait. While I waited to board, I made a phone call to Sandra, my lawyer, and scheduled an urgent meeting for immediately after my return from Hawaii. The voicemail I left was brief, but clear. I needed to make significant changes to my will power of attorney and financial arrangements. My final action before boarding was to call the resort in Hawaii and change my reservation. Instead of sharing a 3-bedroom villa with my children as planned, I booked a private oceanfront suite on the opposite side of the property. The additional cost was substantial, but as I authorized the charge, I felt no guilt, only a sense of liberation. The first-class experience began the moment I stepped onto the plane. The flight attendant greeted me warmly, taking my coat and offering a glass of champagne before I even reached my seat. The contrast between this welcome and my children's coldness wasn't lost on me. My seat was spacious and comfortable with ample legroom and a privacy divider. I settled in, accepted the hot towel offered by the attentive flight attendant, and took a sip of champagne. It was good, better than anything I would normally allow myself to indulge in. "First time in first class?" the flight attendant asked with a kind smile. "Yes," I admitted. "I'm treating myself for a change." "Well, we're glad to have you. Just let me know if you need anything at all." As the rest of the passengers boarded, I found myself wondering where my children were seated, but I pushed the thought away. For once, I wasn't going to spend my time worrying about them. Instead, I pulled out the journal I had packed, intending to document our family vacation, and began writing about something entirely different: my awakening. I wrote about the airport betrayal, about the decades of taking last place in my own life, and about the clarity that had finally come to me in an airport bathroom. I wrote about the changes I intended to make once this trip was over. With each word I put on paper, my resolve strengthened. The 6-hour flight passed quickly. I enjoyed a delicious meal, watched a film I had been wanting to see, and even dozed comfortably for an hour. When we began our descent into Honolulu, I felt a momentary anxiety about facing my children, but I breathed deeply and reminded myself of my new boundaries. As the plane taxied to the gate, I deliberately stayed in my seat, allowing most of the first-class cabin to deplane before me. I wanted to time my exit perfectly, and I did. As I walked up the jet bridge, I could see my 3 children standing in the waiting area, scanning the arriving passengers with increasingly concerned expressions. They didn't expect to see me until the next flight hours later. I walked past them, my head held high. In my peripheral vision, I saw the moment they spotted me, their eyes widening in shock as they registered not only my presence, but my emergence from first class. Thomas called out, "Mom," but I kept walking, moving swiftly through the terminal toward the baggage claim area. They caught up to me at the carousel, all speaking at once. "Mom, what are you doing here? How did you get on this flight? We were worried when we couldn't find you at the gate for the next flight." I turned to face them, my expression calm but firm. There was never a problem with the number of seats on this flight. You lied to me. Their faces registered shock, then guilt, then quickly shifted to defensive indignation. "There must have been a misunderstanding," Thomas began. I cut him off. "I saw your text messages. All of them." That silenced them. Jack had the decency to look ashamed, while Amelia and Thomas exchanged glances, clearly calculating how to manage this unexpected situation. "I'll be staying at the resort as planned," I continued, "but I've changed my accommodation to a private suite. I'll text you tomorrow about dinner." Without waiting for their response, I collected my suitcase from the carousel and walked toward the exit. I heard them calling after me, but I didn't look back. Outside, I bypassed the shared shuttle they would be taking and splurged on a private taxi to the resort. The oceanfront suite was beautiful, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific. I unpacked methodically, hanging my clothes in the closet and placing my toiletries in the marble bathroom. Then I ordered room service, something I had never done before, and ate dinner on my private balcony as the sun set over the ocean. My phone had been buzzing consistently since I left the airport. 20 missed calls, and dozens of text messages from my children. I ignored them all until I had finished my meal, then composed a single text message: "I'm safe, enjoying my vacation. Will contact you when I'm ready." I silenced my phone, changed into my swimsuit, and went for an evening swim in the resort's adults-only infinity pool. The warm water seemed to wash away decades of putting myself last. When I returned to my room, I booked a massage for the following morning. Something else I had never allowed myself. Around 9 p.m., there was a knock at my door. I knew before opening it that it would be my children. They stood in the hallway, Thomas in front with Amelia and Jack flanking him, their expressions, a mixture of confusion, anger, and for Jack at least what appeared to be genuine concern. "Can we come in?" Thomas asked, already moving forward, as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion. I stood firmly in the doorway. "No, I'm not ready for visitors." "Mom, you're being ridiculous," Thomas said, his frustration evident. "We need to talk about what happened." "Yes, we do," I agreed, "but not tonight. I've had a long day." Amelia stepped forward. "Nothing happened the way you're implying. You completely misunderstood the situation at the airport." Did I misunderstand the text message about getting rid of me for the flight, about having 6 hours of peace before dealing with me again? My voice remained steady, but I could see the impact of my words as their faces registered that I had, indeed, seen everything. "That's not what we meant," Jack said, looking genuinely distressed. "It was just a joke." "It wasn't funny," I replied. "None of this is funny to me." "Mom, you must have misunderstood," Thomas insisted, his tone patronizing. "We would never intentionally leave you behind." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, opening the screenshot I had taken of their group text. I held it up for them to see. Did I misunderstand this? Their stunned silence was all the confirmation I needed. "I'll see you for dinner tomorrow night at 7 at the resort restaurant," I said calmly. "Just dinner, nothing else. Right now I need some time to myself." Before they could respond, I closed the door firmly and locked it. I could hear them in the hallway, Thomas's angry voice, Amelia's insistence that I was overreacting, Jack's quieter suggestion that they give me space. Eventually, their voices faded as they walked away. For a moment, I leaned against the door, my heart racing. I had never stood up to my children like that before, never enforced a boundary against their wishes. The feeling was terrifying, but also strangely exhilarating. I felt grief for the relationship I had thought we had, but also a sense of liberation at finally acknowledging the truth. I ran a bath in the luxurious tub, adding the expensive bath salts provided by the resort. As I soaked in the warm, fragrant water, I gave myself permission to feel all the complex emotions swirling through me: sadness, anger, disappointment, but also pride in my newfound courage and hope for a future where I valued myself as much as I had always valued them. The next morning, I woke early and watched the sunrise from my balcony. There was something symbolic about the new day dawning as I began this new chapter of my life. After a light breakfast and strong coffee, I set up my laptop for a video call with Sandra, my lawyer of many years. Sandra had helped me with my will after David died, and she had been managing my legal affairs ever since. She was surprised by my urgent request, but quickly shifted into professional mode when she saw my expression. "Cassandra, you look different," she observed. "More resolute." "I am," I confirmed, and proceeded to explain everything that had happened and the changes I wanted to make. Sandra listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. "I want to revoke all powers of attorney immediately," I said. "All 3 of my children currently have legal authority to make decisions on my behalf if I'm incapacitated. I want that changed." "We can do that," Sandra assured me. "Who would you like to designate instead?" I had thought about this carefully. You, if you're willing, and my friend Eleanor as backup, someone with no financial interest in my decisions. Sandra nodded. And your will. You mentioned changes there as well. Yes, substantial ones. I outlined my new plans, watching as Sandra's eyebrows rose slightly, but appreciating that she maintained her professional demeanor. After finishing with Sandra, I called Benjamin, my financial advisor, and set up a similar video conference. I had always included my children in financial discussions, particularly Thomas, who worked in finance, but today's conversation was private. I need to restructure my investments and accounts, I explained to Benjamin, after summarizing recent events. I want to ensure that my assets are protected and that I maintain sole control over all decisions. That's certainly your right, Benjamin said. But I should mention that Thomas called me yesterday expressing concern about your state of mind and suggesting we shouldn't make any major changes right now. This didn't surprise me, but the speed with which Thomas had moved to block my financial independence angered me. Benjamin, I'm of perfectly sound mind, as I'm sure you can see. Thomas is concerned about his own interests, not mine. Benjamin, to his credit, seemed to understand. I'll prepare the paperwork for the changes you've requested, and I'll make a note that all future communications should be directly with you only. Between appointments, I researched something I had been postponing for years, painting classes. David had always said I had talent, but raising children and working had never left time for pursuing it. I found several artists who taught classes near my home and bookmarked their information for when I returned. In the afternoon, I met with the resort's real estate agent, something I hadn't planned before arriving. The beachfront condominiums they managed were beautiful, and while I had no intention of making an impulsive purchase, I wanted to understand my options for the future. The idea of a place of my own, far from the city where my children lived, held a new appeal. By late afternoon, my phone was buzzing again. This time it wasn't my children directly, but notifications from my bank. Thomas had apparently discovered that he could no longer access my accounts, as I had removed him as an authorized user that morning. Amelia had similarly tried to log into my investment portfolio and been denied. These attempts confirmed that I had made the right decision. At 7 o'clock, I arrived at the resort's upscale restaurant for dinner with my children. I had dressed carefully in a new outfit I had purchased that afternoon, a flowing turquoise dress that complemented my silver hair. The hostess led me to a table where my 3 children and their spouses were already seated. The tension was immediately palpable. Thomas's jaw was tight, Amelia's smile was forced, and only Jack made an attempt at normalcy, rising to pull out my chair. "You look nice, Mom," he said quietly. "Thank you, Jack," I replied, sitting down and placing my napkin in my lap. The initial conversation was strained but civil, focusing on safe topics like the resort amenities and the weather forecast. But after our drinks arrived, Thomas couldn't contain himself any longer. "Mom, we need to talk about what's going on," he said, leaning forward. "Benjamin called me today. He said you're making major financial changes." "Yes, I am," I replied calmly, taking a sip of my wine. "You can't just change everything without consulting us." Thomas's voice rose slightly, causing a few nearby diners to glance our way. "Actually, I can. It's my money, Thomas. My life." Amelia joined in, her tone sharp. "This is so unfair after all we've done for you." I nearly choked on my wine. "All you've done for me?" "Yes," she continued. "We include you in holidays we visit. We agreed to this whole vacation that you wanted so badly. And now you're punishing us over a simple misunderstanding." I set my glass down carefully. "Let's be clear about something. There was no misunderstanding. You deliberately left me at the airport because you didn't want to sit with me on the plane. You lied to my face, and then joked about it, in texts that you knew I could see through the family sharing app that you insisted I join. It wasn't like that," Jack interjected, looking uncomfortable. "It was exactly like that," I countered. "But the airport incident is just a symptom of a much larger problem. For years, I've allowed myself to be an afterthought in your lives, grateful for whatever scraps of attention you were willing to toss my way." I turned to Thomas. "Should we talk about the $50,000 loan you took from me 5 years ago that you never repaid, the money that was supposed to be for my retirement?" Thomas's face reddened. I was going to pay that back. When I asked simply, he had no answer. I looked at Amelia. or the $8,000 in charges on my credit card for your bar association fees and professional wardrobe. The card you were only authorized to use for emergencies while I was in the hospital." Amelia glanced at her husband, who clearly hadn't known about this. "That was a misunderstanding. I thought you had approved those expenses." "And Jack," I continued, turning to my youngest, "the $20,000 you borrowed from my retirement account without asking, using the power of attorney I granted you when I had surgery." Jack at least had the grace to look ashamed. "I was going to tell you. The business was in trouble and I needed the cash flow." "The business that's now making millions," I noted. "Have you ever considered paying me back with interest?" The table fell silent. Their spouses looked shocked, clearly hearing about these financial manipulations for the first time. Thomas's wife, Jennifer, was the first to speak. "Thomas, did you really borrow $50,000 from your mother without paying it back?" Before he could answer, Amelia jumped in. "This isn't fair. You're making us sound terrible when you know how much we love you." "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Because from where I sit, love involves respect, consideration, honesty. I haven't seen much of any of those things lately." Jack's wife, Sophia, reached over and touched my hand. "Cassandra, I'm so sorry. I had no idea about any of this, especially the airport incident. That was wrong, completely wrong." Her genuine contrition was a stark contrast to my children's defensiveness. Thomas was fuming. Amelia had tears in her eyes that I recognized as manipulation rather than genuine remorse, and Jack looked torn between shame and the desire to side with his siblings. "After all I've sacrificed for you," Amelia said, her voice trembling in a way that had worked on me countless times before. "We both know who sacrificed for whom," I replied steadily, immune to the performance for the first time in my life. I stood up, placing my napkin on the table. "I've decided to cut my vacation short. I'm flying home tomorrow to implement the changes I've been planning. You're welcome to stay and enjoy the rest of the trip." "Mom, you can't be serious," Thomas protested, standing as well. "We need to work this out." "We will," I assured him. "But not on your terms and not by sweeping it under the rug as we've always done before. Real change requires real accountability, and I don't think you're ready for that yet." As I turned to leave, I could see panic in their eyes. For the first time, they were realizing that their safety net, their backup plan, their emotional and financial ATM might no longer be available unconditionally. They suddenly became attentive, loving, concerned, just as they always did when they needed something from me. "Mom, please," Amelia called after me, her voice, "Honey, sweet now. We love you so much. We can fix this." I paused and turned back. "I love you too. That's never been the question. The question is whether you respect me, value me, see me as a whole person rather than just your mother. And that's something you'll need to demonstrate, not just say." With that, I walked out of the restaurant, my head held high despite the tears threatening to spill over. In the elevator up to my room, I allowed myself a moment of grief for the relationship I had thought we had, for the dream of family harmony I had clung to for so long. But by the time I reached my suite, resolve had replaced sadness. It was time to move forward. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of my new beachfront condo watching the Hawaiian sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My silver hair now styled in a flattering bob, instead of the practical cut I had worn for decades, lifted slightly in the ocean breeze. My reflection in the glass door showed a woman transformed not just by a new hairstyle and wardrobe, but by an inner light that came from finally living authentically. The changes had been both external and internal. I had lost 15 pounds, not through dieting, but through the joy of movement, walking the beach every morning, and taking swim classes 3 times a week. My skin had a healthy glow from proper self-care, something I had always postponed in favor of caring for others. But the most significant change was in my eyes, which now held a confidence and peace that had been missing for too long. Inside my condo, evidence of my new life was everywhere. Paintings in various stages of completion stood on easels and leaned against walls. My work was primitive, but improving steadily under the guidance of Makani, a local artist who had become both mentor and friend. 2 of my pieces had even been displayed in a small gallery showing for beginning artists an achievement that had filled me with more pride than I had felt in years. My phone chimed with a FaceTime call. It was Thomas, right on schedule for our weekly conversation. I took a deep breath and answered, smiling as his face appeared on the screen. "Hi, Mom," he said, his tone respectful, a noticeable change from a year ago. "How are you?" "I'm well, Thomas. Just watching the sunset." "How are the kids?" We chatted for about 20 minutes, his manner careful but increasingly genuine. Of my 3 children, Thomas had made the most progress in our relationship. After the Hawaii incident, he had initially been the most resistant to change, furious about the financial restructuring that meant he no longer had access to my accounts. But 6 months of therapy suggested by Jennifer, who had been horrified by his behavior, had helped him recognize patterns of entitlement that had damaged not just our relationship but many of his others as well. "Jennifer and I would like to bring the kids out for a visit next month, if that works for you," he said toward the end of our call. "Just for the weekend. We'll get a hotel nearby." The boundary was clear, and I appreciated it. "That would be lovely. There's a children's workshop at the gallery that your kids might enjoy." After we hung up, I reflected on the journey with my children over the past year. It had not been easy, and the relationships had evolved in different ways, not all of them as I might have hoped. Amelia had taken the changes the hardest. When she realized that the inheritance she had counted on had been significantly reduced and restructured, her true colors had emerged fully. Her attempts at manipulation had escalated dramatically, cycling through guilt, anger, supposed health scares, and finally threats of cutting me off from my grandchildren. When none of these tactics worked, she had retreated into a cold distance, our interaction now limited to brief formal exchanges at family events that others organized. Jack's journey had been somewhere in the middle. Initially defensive, he had gradually come to recognize the unfairness of his past behavior. A series of honest conversations had cleared the air between us, particularly when he acknowledged the financial exploitation and offered a repayment plan for the money he had taken. Our relationship was on a healing trajectory, still fragile, but built on a more honest foundation than before. My new will and estate plan reflected these realities. The bulk of my estate would now go to education trusts for my grandchildren, with the funds controlled by trustees rather than their parents. I had established nursing scholarships at 3 local hospitals, a legacy that would continue the work I had loved. My children would receive a small percentage of my assets contingent on completion of a specified amount of community service, a requirement that Thomas had initially called punitive but now understood as an expression of my values. The financial changes had been just one aspect of my transformation. I had embraced adventures I had postponed for decades. A painting tour of Paris where I had wandered the Louvre in awe and sketched along the Seine. A safari in Tanzania where I had photographed elephants at sunset and danced with Maasai women under the stars. Small group tours had introduced me to like-minded travelers, some of whom had become dear friends who visited me in Hawaii or welcomed me into their homes around the world. My support system had expanded in ways I never expected. The woman from the airport bathroom, Margaret, had become a close confidant after we exchanged contact information that day. Our shared experience had bloomed into a friendship based on mutual respect and understanding. Through her, I had connected with a support group for elderly parents, establishing boundaries with adult children, a resource that had been invaluable during the most difficult transitions. My journey through therapy had been equally transformative. Dr. Kiawe, a compassionate but direct therapist, had helped me understand the patterns that had led to such unbalanced relationships with my children. "You taught them how to treat you," she had said in one breakthrough session. "Now you're teaching them something new. It's uncomfortable for everyone, but necessary." The most profound lesson I had learned, the one I shared with others in the support network I now helped facilitate, was that respect isn't automatic even from family. Love without respect is incomplete, a shadow of what relationships should be. By setting boundaries, I hadn't diminished my relationships, but rather created space for healthier ones to develop. "The people who truly love you will cross the bridge to meet you where you are," I often told others in my position. "Those who only loved what you could do for them will fall away, and that's not a loss, it's a clarification." My doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. It was Diane and Kenji, friends from my painting class, arriving for our weekly dinner and movie night. As we shared a meal on my balcony, laughing and debating which film to watch, I felt a contentment that had eluded me for most of my adult life. Later that evening, after my friends had left, I opened my laptop to finalize details for my upcoming solo world cruise. As I reviewed the itinerary, I couldn't help but contrast it with the Hawaii trip that had changed everything a year earlier. That trip had been built on desperation, an attempt to buy connection. This journey was a celebration of independence, curiosity, and self-respect. The seats on my journey now were filled only with people who truly valued me, who saw me as a whole person rather than a role or a resource. Some of those seats were still reserved for my children and grandchildren, the doors never completely closed. But access was now earned through respect rather than granted through obligation, and that had made all the difference. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with loved ones? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that prioritizing your own well-being isn't selfish, it's necessary. Like, subscribe, and share if this story resonated with you. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to create the life you deserve, surrounded by people who truly value you.